Real strength isn't in the punch, it's in the man who knows when to stand. Arnold Schwarzenegger. The slap of flesh against steel cut through the gym like a shot. A man staggered backward, his back slamming into the inclined bench with a hollow clang. His water bottle tumbled, hit the rubber floor, and skidded beneath the dumbbell rack. A towel, once white, now dirted and damp, fluttered through the air like a surrender flag before landing beneath someone's foot. That foot belonged to a man built like a freight truck, thick, necklace, tattooed across one temple. He smirked. Didn't know this bench was for public use. He muttered loud enough for the room to hear. Thought it was reserved for people who actually lift. Laughter. Sharp. Measured. Practiced. The man who had been shoved, a black man, early 30s, lean but defined, didn't speak. He steadied himself on the rack. His fingers curled tight around the cold steel, not from fear. From containment. He looked down. Then sideways. No one met his eyes. Treadmills kept spinning. Trainers kept checking clipboards. One guy near the pull-up bar adjusted his AirPods like he hadn't noticed. But everyone had. They just didn't want to be next. Another bully stepped up. Taller. Paler. Holding his phone up, pretending to record his set, but the lens pointed right at the man still catching his breath. Smile, he said. Let's make you famous. The third one, shorter, bulkier, louder, picked up the man's towel and gave it a mock sniff. EW. Charity sweat. More laughter. Then he kicked the towel. It slid, limp and stained, across the gym floor, beneath the cable machines. The man still didn't speak. But someone else noticed. From across the gym, on the far end by the decline benches, a figure shifted. Slowly. Quietly. A mountain in stillness. Arnold Schwarzenegger didn't raise his voice. He didn't stand. Not yet. He simply looked. One arm resting on his knee. The other draped across a towel. Clean, folded once. His breathing was steady. But his eyes were locked on the scene like a hunter staring through scope. He saw the way the crowd dissolved into silence. He saw the cowardice clothed in gym gear. He saw the three men basking in dominance they hadn't earned. And he saw the one who had stayed standing, dignity coiled in restraint. The third bully leaned forward, inches from the man's face now. You deaf or just slow? Another shove. Harder. This time, the man didn't flinch. He exhaled. Once. Quiet. But Arnold had already started to rise. The shift was small. A tightening of the fingers. A roll of the shoulder. But the effect, immediate. A nearby man doing tricep pushdowns froze mid-rep. A woman stretching on a yoga mat stopped mid-lunge. Something had changed. They didn't know what yet. But the mountain was no longer sitting. And the silence had just become dangerous. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Arnold didn't move fast. He never had to. His frame unfolded from the bench like a memory resurfacing, slow, deliberate, heavier than the plates clanging across the gym. One boot grounded. Then the other. He stood. He didn't look at the three men. He didn't need to. His presence was already a disturbance in their performance. A pressure shift. A fault line beginning to hum beneath their bravado. He reached for the towel beside him. Folded once. Still warm from the bench. He took it in both hands, folded it again, the corners aligned perfectly. Then, he placed it down. Next came the bag. Black. Heavy canvas. Worn from decades of service, its straps frayed at the edges. He opened it with the care of a surgeon, not rushed, not hesitant. Inside were only 3 items. An old water bottle. A wrist wrap still caked with chalk. And the belt. He stared at the lifting belt for a second longer. Leather, cracked and faded. The initials AS. Barely visible anymore, etched into the back with a soldering iron long ago. The gold threading around the edges had dulled into the color of dried blood. He hadn't worn it in years. Not since then. His fingers traced the curve of the buckle like they were reading Braille from a past he'd buried. And in that moment, time buckled. Flashback. A parking lot. Summer heat baking concrete into haze. A boy. Early 20s. Light frame. Running shoes. Fresh gym gloves. 3 men. Louder. Angrier. 1 shove. 1 punch. Then 3 more. And Arnold, 20 feet away. Standing. Watching. He had frozen. Something in him, legacy, image, fear, had cemented his boots to the asphalt. The boy went down. Nobody helped. Not then. Not him. The shame didn't scream. It whispered. And it had been whispering ever since. Back in the gym, the echo of that moment clenched his jaw. He lifted the belt. The leather squeaked like it remembered. He wrapped it around his waist, slow, threading it with mechanical calm. He pulled it tight. Not for his back. For his spine. A young man nearby caught the motion. Barely 20. Bicep curls mid-set. He nudged his friend. Is that? His friend didn't answer. Just watched. Everyone did now. Arnold walked past a mirror but didn't look. His reflection had nothing to prove. It wasn't about vanity. It was about weight, of silence, of action, of what happens when a man who once failed to stand, finally does. He passed the leg press machine. The preacher curl station. Each step precise, but not loud. He wasn't rushing. He was arriving. The bullies weren't done. Not even close. The black man bent to retrieve his towel, the same one that had been kicked halfway across the gym. He moved slowly, dignity clinging to each motion like sweat, eyes fixed on the floor. His hand reached out beneath the bench, fingers curling around the damp fabric. Then came the boot. A sneaker stomped down beside his hand, stopping him cold. Not on the towel. On the message. "Whoa there," said the tall one, grinning. "Didn't say you could have that back." Another round of laughter. This time louder, more performative. The third bully pulled out his phone, turned the camera on himself, and flipped it to show the man crouched under the bench. "Live from the jungle gym," he sneered. "We've got this dude trying to sneak a lift like it's food stamps." The man didn't flinch. Didn't speak. Just took the towel and stood. Then came the shake. The first bully grabbed a dumbbell, nothing too heavy, and tossed it near the man's feet. It clanged, hard, the noise ricocheting off steel and rubber. "Oops," he smiled. "Guess you forgot to re-rack." They were circling now. Not a fight. A ritual. The man looked to the side. A gym staffer, young in branded gear, was watching. Headphones in. Eyes on. But he turned away. Too fast. Too guilty. Near the squat racks, a guy in a hoodie whispered, "This is getting out of hand." His friend answered, "Then stop it." But neither moved. Because this was the anatomy of cruelty, it didn't work in punches. It worked in permission. And permission was everywhere. One of the bullies faked a lunge, making the man flinch. Another leaned in, phone still filming, and barked, "Yo, say something! We're trying to get views here." Silence. Not weakness. Containment. They didn't see that. But someone else did. Arnold had reached the dumbbell aisle. He stood at the far end. Wide stance, belt strapped, arms loose at his sides. His shadow stretched out ahead of him like the edge of a gathering storm. His presence didn't need an introduction. It arrived like a shifting pressure in the room. A woman doing glute bridges lowered her bar mid-set and just stopped. A guy in a weighted vest paused his timer. The air grew dense. Something was coming. And still, the bullies didn't look up. The second one climbed onto the bench, arms wide, like a stage performer soaking in spotlight. "Ladies and gentlemen," he shouted, "welcome to Welfare Wednesdays! Today's special, pity lifts and excuses." Then, he grabbed the black man's shoulder. Tight. The crowd tensed. He spun him half around like a puppet. Smile for the camera. And that's when Arnold moved again. One step. Then another. Measured. Quiet. But the silence behind him. That silence had weight. The second bully still had his hand on the man's shoulder when the silence broke. But it didn't break with sound. It broke with awareness. The kind that spreads like heat through skin. The kind that makes your back tighten without knowing why. The kind that turns air into pressure. The crowd felt it first. By the cable machines, a woman paused mid-rep, her breathing shallowed. Near the water fountain, a trainer stopped pretending to refill his bottle. Even the cardio zone, farther off, seemed to slow. Because Arnold was walking. Not fast. But forward. Boots muted by rubber flooring. Frame wide. Back straight. Arms loose, but not limp. And every step he took bent the room's attention around him. The man being harassed didn't see it yet. His eyes were locked on the bully in front of him. The grip on his shoulder tightened. The third bully leaned closer, whispering something meant to cut. Something meant to hollow. But even they felt it, though they didn't know why. Their volume dropped. The theatrics dulled. The sneers turned quieter, shallower, unsure. "Yo, why is it so quiet?" one of them muttered. Then the first bully turned, just slightly, and froze. There he was. Arnold. 3 strides away. No expression. No clenched fists. No raised voice. But his eyes. Cold. Set. Not angry. Not theatrical. Just inevitable. "Holy shit," the bully whispered. His friend followed his gaze. "No way." They tried to laugh, to mask the shift, to stay on script. "Hey, look who decided to join us!" The tallest one called out, louder than needed. "Hollywood royalty in the house!" No one laughed. Not even his friends. Arnold didn't respond. Didn't flinch. He kept walking. One of the bullies spread his arms. "What's the matter, Grandpa? Missed the red carpet?" Still no answer. Still no stop. A guy by the preacher curl machine whispered to his friend, "Is that really him?" His friend didn't answer. Just lifted his phone. Not to film. Just to hold it. Like you do when something sacred might happen and you don't want to interrupt. Arnold stepped closer. The second bully puffed his chest. Trying to regain altitude. "You lost?" He smirked. "Museum's that way." Arnold finally stopped. 6 feet away. He looked at the man still holding the black man's shoulder. Then at the towel, crumpled and stepped on. Then back at the man. He spoke for the first time. 2 words. "Pick it up." The gym held its breath. The bully blinked. Then laughed, too loud, too forced. "Excuse me?" Arnold's voice didn't rise. His posture didn't change. He simply repeated, quieter this time, but heavier. "Pick it up." The words didn't echo. They landed. Flat. Final. And the next move would change everything. The first bully stepped forward, swaggering like a man still trying to believe the room was his. "Let me get this straight," he said, gesturing wide like a bad actor milking a spotlight. "You want me to pick up his towel?" He jerked his chin toward the black man, who stood still, silent, eyes locked on the floor. Arnold said nothing. He didn't move. Didn't blink. He just existed. More pressure than person. Like a force of nature that had finally stepped into frame. The bully grinned. "You used to be someone, man. What's this? Your comeback tour? Lifting for justice?" The second bully chimed in, nervous but trying to sound bold. "You gonna hit us with a motivational quote? Maybe a protein shake commercial?" More laughter. None of it real. Arnold's hands remained loose by his sides. He didn't flinch. He didn't need to. Because the room had already shifted. Everyone knew it. Even them. They just hadn't admitted it yet. Then came the last straw. The third bully, shorter, but meaner, stepped in front of the black man again. "You know what?" he said, and spat, just beside the towel. A clear message. A final insult. That broke something. Not in the black man. He had been broken and rebuilt in silence too many times. But in the room. A woman at the squat rack gasped audibly. A guy filming slowly lowered his phone. "And Arnold?" He stepped forward once. Just once. The first bully's smirk twitched. Arnold's eyes narrowed, not in rage, but in recognition. He'd seen this before. Boys dressed as men, addicted to attention, confusing cruelty with dominance. He'd been near this once and done nothing. Not today. Not again. Arnold raised one hand, not to strike, but to unfasten the lifting belt around his waist. He let it slide through the loops with a hiss of old leather. The gesture wasn't theatrical. It was mechanical. Like loading a weapon. The first bully swallowed. The silence was now weaponized. Arnold's voice came low. Calm. Controlled. "You wanted an audience," he said. "Now you have one. A beat. Then, do something." It wasn't a challenge. It was an invitation. An open door to a lesson they weren't ready to learn. The tall one hesitated. The third one looked to his friends. The second bully let out a dry chuckle, but even he sounded unsure. The tension snapped when the first bully lunged forward. A palm to Arnold's chest. A hard shove. The kind meant to provoke. To prove something. Arnold didn't move. Not an inch. The man who'd shoved him bounced back slightly, like hitting something immovable. Arnold's hand twitched. Once. Then dropped. He stepped forward. One boot landed louder than the shove itself. And in that moment, every weight in the gym felt lighter than the silence pressing down on the room. The moment the bully's hand left Arnold's chest, time bent. Not slowed. Bent. The gym didn't breathe. Machines stood idle, as if afraid to interrupt. Arnold's gaze didn't waver. No scowl. No flinch. Just the steel stillness of a man who knew exactly what came next. The first bully took a half step back, instinct, not decision. Too late. Arnold moved. Not fast, but precise. Like muscle memory carved in war. His left arm shot up, swatting the bully's second shove aside like a gust brushing away a fly. With the same motion, he pivoted, stepped inside the man's space, and drove a forearm across the chest. Not a punch. A placement. Like pressing a slab of granite into a wall. The bully staggered, off balance, off script, right into the edge of a squat rack. His spine hit steel with a thud. A plate trembled behind him and clattered to the mat. He wheezed. The silence held. Then the second bully made his move. Louder. Angrier. Sloppier. He lunged from the side, swinging a 10-pound dumbbell like a club. Arnold ducked just enough. The weight whooshed past his head. Arnold stepped into the arc, caught the man's wrist mid-swing, twisted, and slammed his shoulder into the man's ribs. A sick crack followed. The dumbbell fell. So did the man. The third one hesitated. Just for a second. Wrong second. Arnold turned. Close distance. The shorter man tried a feint jab, then a step back. It failed. Arnold swept the man's leg with a low pivot, dropping him onto his back with a mat-thudding collapse. The gym erupted in gasps, sharp, not loud. Shock had a volume all its own. Arnold stood at the center of it all, breathing steady, fists unclenched, eyes tracking. No theatrics. Just function. The first bully, still against the rack, tried to rise. Arnold didn't strike him. He stepped into his space. Stared. And the man froze. All at once, every noise in the gym, the clink of chains, the music on the speakers, the buzz of overhead lights, fell away. All that remained was presence. The black man, still by the bench, had not moved. His hands at his sides. Chest rising. Eyes locked, not on the bullies anymore. On Arnold. And in that quiet stare, something unspoken passed between them. Not thanks. Not all. Recognition. This wasn't rescue. This was balance. Arnold didn't speak. He turned back toward the remaining two on the floor. One tried to crawl. The other whimpered. Neither made it far. Because this wasn't just a reckoning. It was consequence. And it had only begun. The third bully, flat on his back, was the first to scream. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a crackling exhale of disbelief as he tried to pull himself away, knees scrambling, palms slipping against rubber matting. Arnold didn't pursue. He didn't have to. He advanced. Slow. Heavy. Every step a closing door. The man whimpered, reaching for the closest thing he could find, an unused kettlebell near the incline bench. He grabbed it with both hands, swinging wide and low like a man drowning in panic. Arnold sidestepped. Simple. Then caught the handle midair. A stop. An instant redirection. He used the man's own motion against him, yanking the kettlebell down and sideways. The man's leg buckled under the redirected force. The scream that followed wasn't for attention, it was primal. Real. He collapsed, clutching his thigh, twitching in pain. The crowd didn't cheer. They watched. Frozen. Ashamed. Transfixed. The second bully, the one Arnold had dropped with a blow to the ribs, had made it to his knees. He tried to stand, clutching the squat rack for support, but his breath stuttered with every movement. He didn't look at Arnold. He looked at the floor. Like a child caught stealing. Arnold walked past him. No words. No glance. Judgment doesn't negotiate. The first bully, the one who shoved, who started all of this, was upright now. Shaky, but standing. His lips bled where he'd bitten down. His chest puffed in fake defiance, but his hands trembled. He reached behind him, felt the cold steel of a barbell on the floor, and grabbed it with both hands. 20 kilograms of desperation. He swung it like a wide scythe, eyes wild. Arnold didn't dodge. He stepped in. His left arm locked. The bar clanged into his forearm and stopped, dead, like it had hit rebar. Arnold twisted the bar out of his hands and swept low. One clean motion. The barbell took the man's legs clean out from under him. He landed hard, back first, breath crushed out of his lungs in a gasp. The clang of the barbell rolling across the floor echoed like a final bell. Still, no one spoke. A woman near the resistance bands had started crying, one hand over her mouth. A young man, mid-set, sat frozen on the bench, eyes wide, dumbbells still in his hands. The silence wasn't just silence anymore. It was grief. It was truth. It was the sound of consequence. Arnold stood in the center of it all. His chest rising, measured. His hands open. 3 men lay broken at his feet. Not bloodied, but dismantled. And still, he had said almost nothing. Because he didn't need to. His silence was the sentence. And every breath he took now was just punctuation. The 3 bullies lay scattered, one holding his ribs, one cradling his leg, the other flat on his back, blinking up at the ceiling as if expecting it to collapse. Arnold stood over them. Not triumphant, not angry. Just still. A pillar in a room full of ruins. He turned slowly. Not toward the exit. Not toward the crowd. Toward the man they had humiliated. The black man hadn't moved from where he stood. But something in his posture had shifted. Shoulders squared. Chin slightly raised. Still breathing hard, but steady now. Like he was remembering how. Arnold walked over to him. No urgency. No ceremony. He stopped, turned back to the 3 on the ground, and spoke again. This time, his voice was louder. Not shouting, just undeniable. You broke him in front of everyone, he said. Now fix it. The same way. Nobody moved. The gym was silent except for the shallow, shamed breathing of the defeated. Arnold took a step toward the first bully, the one who started it. Get up, he said. The man groaned, sitting up slowly. His pride hurt worse than anything else. Arnold pointed. "Look at him," he said. "Say it to his face." The man looked at the black man, hesitated, then spoke. Voice cracking, barely audible. "I'm sorry," he said. "I shouldn't have done that. I was wrong." Not rehearsed. Not performative. Just stripped. Arnold waited. The second bully pushed himself upright, one arm clutching his ribs. He didn't look at Arnold. He looked at the man he mocked, and nodded. "Same," he mumbled. "That's on us." The third, still on one knee, stared down at the floor. "Wasn't right," he said, voice hollow. "I'm sorry." The black man didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence was the response. Not forgiveness. Not revenge. Just the quiet reassembling of dignity. Arnold stepped forward. Unfastened the belt around his waist. It came off slow, like it didn't want to leave him. He didn't hand it over. He didn't announce anything. He simply knelt. And laid it down. Right at the feet of the man who'd endured it all. Then he stood. One last look, at the three who were once lions and now mice. "One day," he said, "you'll understand what strength really looks like." He turned his back. No applause. No music. Just silence again. But this time, it didn't belong to the cowards. It belonged to something heavier. Something earned. A week passed. The gym didn't speak of it. Not out loud. But the echoes lingered, in glances, in longer silences, in the way people moved around each other now. Something had changed. The bullies didn't return. No one asked where they went. The trainers stopped pretending they didn't see things. People started spotting for strangers more often. And every morning, at exactly 6:42 a.m., the man who had once been humiliated stepped through the doors, shoulders steady, steps clean. He didn't wear the belt. He carried it. Folded in one arm, tucked against his chest like something sacred. Not as a badge. As a reminder. He no longer avoided the free weight area. That space, once claimed by noise and dominance, now made room for quiet. This morning, the light was softer, filtered through the high windows in golden slants. Dust floated like faint memories. The clang of metal was still there, but gentler somehow. Less about ego. More about effort. He took his place at the same bench. Adjusted the seat. Wiped it down carefully. Unwrapped his lifting gloves with the same precision Arnold once used to fold his towel. A rhythm had formed. But the real shift came quietly. It was near the lockers. Where boys still postured, where banter lived just on the edge of cruelty. A young kid, chubby, flushed, maybe 14, stood alone near the mirrors. His shirt clung to him in all the wrong ways. His water bottle had slipped and spilled, soaking his shorts. The laughter came fast. From 3 older teens. Too confident. Too practiced. "Dude, did you piss yourself?" One flicked the bottle away with his foot. Another pulled out his phone. "Yo, let's get this for TikTok, gym fail of the week." The kid didn't cry. He just froze. Familiar. That kind of stillness people mistake for weakness, but it's not. It's the stillness before collapse. Until a shadow fell across the scene. Not a shout. Just a presence. The man had walked over. Quiet. Carrying the belt. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't puff his chest. He simply said, "That's enough." 3 words. But they dropped like steel on tile. The teens didn't argue. They didn't laugh. They just stopped. The kid looked up, wide-eyed. The man nodded once. Calm. Then turned, walking back toward his bench, belt still folded tight. Not worn. Still carried. Like a story being written without words. And somewhere, far from that gym, a man with weathered hands and quiet eyes sat beneath morning sun, sipping coffee. He didn't need to watch the news. Didn't need to check his phone. He knew. The weight had changed hands. And the next chapter didn't belong to him. The sun had just begun to fall behind the California hills when Arnold stepped into the quiet of his backyard. No weights. No steel. No mirrors. Just stillness. He moved like he always had, measured, efficient. Not from pain. From discipline. A coffee mug rested between his palms, ceramic chipped near the handle. It had no slogan. No logo. Just history. He didn't look at his phone. He didn't need to. But it buzzed once. A message. From a number saved years ago, but rarely used. He opened it. One image. A photo. Inside the gym. Backlit by the high windows, standing tall with the soft afternoon light streaming in behind him, was the man. The one who had once stood surrounded by shame. Now he stood alone. Not hunched. Not small. Just, ready. Across his shoulder, the belt. Not worn around his waist. Not flaunted. Just carried. Like a torch. Like a vow. The caption beneath the photo was from a gym goer. Someone who had watched from the sidelines. He didn't lift the heaviest weight in the gym. He lifted something bigger. Us. Arnold stared at the screen. Then slowly set the phone face down on the table beside him. His fingers tightened slightly around the mug. Not from emotion. From something quieter. Something deeper. Peace. He leaned back in the chair. Closed his eyes for a moment. And remembered. The parking lot. The first time he failed. The gym floor. The moment he reclaimed it. The silence. The belt. The stare. And now this. Not applause. Not headlines. A photo. A presence. A transfer. The belt had moved on. And with it, so had the responsibility. He opened his eyes again. The sky had dimmed. Hints of lavender and gold melting into the west. Somewhere, that man was still in the gym, training, watching, standing. Somewhere else, another young man was being laughed at. And maybe next time, someone would step in. Not with fists. Not with fame. With presence. Because legacy isn't carved in granite. It's passed. Quietly. Intentionally. From man to man. Through silence. Through action. Through weight. Arnold stood. Walked back toward the door. Didn't look behind. He didn't need to. Some echoes didn't call for revisiting. Some echoes answered themselves. And somewhere in that gym, under the overhead lights and quiet glances, the belt wasn't just being carried anymore. It was becoming something else. Not protection. Not punishment. A reminder of who we stand for when we choose not to walk away. If you enjoyed this story, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories.